Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Bob the Bookerer. So we are in October at the time of filming, and that really only means one thing in the book world, apart from the fact that we've just had about 1 million releases come out in September and still some coming out in October and November, ready for the Christmas rush. It also does mean that we are in peak awards season, and there are about 1 million book prizes, and it seems that they double every year in amount. But we have quite a few book prizes that are going on, that have either just finished, are in the process of being about to announce winners, or shortlists having been announced, and all that kind of jazz. And I kind of just wanted to have a little look at some of the ones that I'm keeping an eye on, if not necessarily reading. You may guess from a fair few of my videos that I do follow a few prizes, the Booker and the Women's being kind of two of the main ones. But especially this year, there have been 2 other prizes that I'm keeping an eye on. There are a few others that I'm going to speak about today that I have been really wanting to read for a while, and yeah, we'll go from there. First up is a prize that I have sort of been loosely following for a couple of years, and this year have decided to kind of bite the bullet a little bit and actually read the shortlists. And that is the Polari Prize. So this is a book for LGBTQ fiction and non-fiction and kind of everything, actually. And that's for me part of the appeal of this prize. I will do a separate video once I've read the shortlists, and I'm really excited sort of at the end of the month to be going to the award ceremony for this wonderful prize. But essentially it is a prize that really focuses on LGBTQ writing, and so as a result you get this really kind of fascinating mix of non-fiction, poetry, plays, criticism, fiction obviously as well, some other things that I've probably forgotten, and it's this really interesting mishmash. So I mentioned it a little bit in my September wrap-up from some of the books that I've been reading of it so far, but for example, in one of the categories you've got Kevin Maxwell's Forced Out, which is a non-fiction book all about being black and gay in the police force in the UK, and sort of the discrimination he faced sort of internally, and then sort of especially once he sort of tried challenging things, and really had to sort of deal with the institutional issues of the police force. But then you've also got in that same category Shuggie Bain, Rainbow Milk, Swimming in the Dark. You've got all of these sort of those 3 sort of books that have sort of been fairly big in terms of LGBTQ fiction over the last sort of couple of years. And then in that same category you've got a poetry collection, and you've got like a non-fiction book alongside it. It's a wonderfully weird mix, and I think that's what's really special about it. Part of me is sort of thinking, how do you balance these against each other? How do you judge them against each other? But in many ways I guess the same thing happens with fiction prizes, right? Because how do you judge, I don't know, like an experimental book like No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood? How do you talk about that book alongside some of the other books in the shortlist, like Bewilderment, or pretty much anything else in that shortlist? Actually, that is kind of the wonderful odd one out. And so I'm really excited to be reading the shortlists for the 2 prizes that this book has. So it has one for first books, which are the ones that I was just talking about, and then it has a separate prize for just sort of other books, so non-first books. I think they describe it much better. I don't know. my description of non-first books is strangely not being taken up. I have no idea why that hasn't caught on. It's so catchy. Anyway, that aside, so that's one prize that I'm really kind of looking at the moment, and I'm really excited about following it a little bit more, just because I think it's kind of already revealed a few books to me that I had absolutely not heard of, a few poets especially that I hadn't heard of at all, and I'm really excited to talk about those. So a video will be kind of coming up at some point, either later this month or early in November, to talk about that wonderful prize. But it's all sort of chaired and run by Paul Burston, who is an author in his own right, and who I think I've got a book of his. This is again my professional setup. Just have to move a plate so I can find this book. Paul Burston, who does quite a lot of really interesting writing around queer sort of storylines, but this is Queen's Country, which is a non-fiction book looking at kind of Britain and kind of the queer sort of nightlife spots and sort of areas of the country. So yeah, really, really excited to check that out, but also just really excited to check out the prize as it is as well. And I've also mentioned briefly in some of my videos as well recently, around the Wainwright Prize, which is a nature prize, a nature writing prize. And again, it's got two shortlists, one for conservation and one for nature writing. And I was very lucky to go to the award ceremony and with Eric Carl Anderson over at Lonesome Reader, who very kindly invited me to come along. And it was just such a beautiful evening because these authors were all so clearly passionate about the environment and about nature in so many different ways. And I mean, I'm a massive sucker for any book about nature. As much as Larry jokes that if it has a tree in it, I'd give it 5 stars. That's not far from the truth. It's, yeah, I love nature. I grew up spending a lot of time, although I grew up in South London, which is not necessarily known for being full of nature. I spent a lot of time going to like rookeries and gardens and things like that as a kid, and it's something that's so special to me. So I'm really excited to be reading the shortlists for the Wainwright Prize. These books are kind of exactly up my street, and I'm just so excited to read them. But there are many other prizes out there, as I'm going to talk about. So this year we've already had, for example, we've got the Booker, which is obviously going to be announcing its winner in early November. We've already had the Women's Prize winner announcement for the wonderful Piranesi. We have also, in the US, have already had the Pulitzer announcement. We've just recently had the Nobel Prize. All of which are very exciting and big, but there are a few others that I'm loosely following and kind of want to check out a little bit more of. One of them is the Giller Prize, which is a Canadian literature prize, and you know, Canadian literature, the bits of it I've read, and obviously there are some big name authors like Margaret Atwood as well, but there are so many fantastic authors writing in Canada. It's kind of, for a country of sort of relatively small population, like about 30 million, which isn't that small, but you know, for a country of a relatively small population, as it were, compared to many other countries sort of publishing in English, it has a tremendous output of incredible authors. So I was really excited to see the lists coming out from this, including a book that I absolutely adored, which was Jordan Tannahill's The Listeners, which I read as an advance copy months ago and absolutely fell in love with. It's a book all about this woman who hears sort of a humming noise in the background, and she at first thinks it's just her, and she sort of starts going a bit, almost sort of, she starts losing sense of reality quite quickly because she can hear it but nobody else can, it seems, and it really starts affecting her relationships because she starts basically not sleeping and she starts becoming a bit more paranoid. But actually in the process she meets a few other people who also hear the sound, and it then sort of moves into a very intelligent book, in my opinion, on thinking about in-group versus out-group, because this group becomes so tight in thinking that everybody else outside of that group is trying to get them. But you know, I really urge you to go and check out the rest of the shortlist for that prize. It looks phenomenal. I think everything else on that list looks great. There's Miriam Teeves, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and you know, with and just so many books that just sound absolutely incredible. Canada, I just think, has this really brilliant literary scene in that it manages to often, I think, from the bits I've seen, at least, for, you know, at least the bits that make it out of Canada and into sort of UK kind of consciousness, as it were. It's a book that it's a country where the literary scene just feels so interesting and diverse, so many exciting voices breaking through all the time, particularly talking about various kind of complicated aspects of identity. So looking at, for example, a book that was published a few years ago, Jonny Appleseed, which I just thought was phenomenal. Just this sort of autofiction, sort of fiction book, where it by Joshua Whiteside, I believe, which really looked at the kind of experience of being an Indigenous First Nations person who's also kind of queer and sort of exploring sexuality, and how that interacts with various parts of his world, and you know, on a reservation or in kind of sort of wider Canada. I just thought was absolutely stunning. So really, really excited for that. And linked to that, I guess, as well, we've got the National Book Awards in the US. Too many to keep track of. I think the Giller and National Book Awards are ones that I always kind of look at a little bit from a distance and sort of maybe cherry pick some books that I think sound fascinating. And I mean, it was really exciting with the National Book Awards to see, for example, The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., which is a book I adore, sort of being part of that mix, because it's a book that, you know, it sort of still is a bit strange to me that it kind of missed out on being in a Booker-long list. It feels like it was sort of published quite early into the year, and it feels like it hasn't really received that much other prize attention, which is really surprising to me, because I just think it's such a phenomenal book, a real game changer, a real groundbreaker. But I'm really excited to see how the rest of that how the rest of the shortlist for the National Book Awards goes. Those are all books published by US authors, and so there also may be some names that have not sort of quite travelled across the pond to us in little old UK, but I'm really excited to see how that one goes. There's also the Baillie Gifford Prize, which is a prize for non-fiction, which is also quite exciting. It's an area that I've been sort of thinking I might want to do a little bit more reading on. But again, how do you compare non-fiction books to each other? There must be just these sort of radically different styles of approaching it. And I listened to a podcast where the judges were talking about it, and they did say that one of the interesting challenges is, you know, obviously focusing on the subject matter, but also thinking about the writing process. How well researched is this? How is the writing done? How is this made accessible for people who might not know anything about the topic? And on the Baillie Gifford Prize, there is a book that I've already read, and one that I'm planning on reading because it's also on the Wainwright Prize shortlist. And the one I have already read is a book I mentioned recently in my wrap up of some new books that have just are kind of due to come out this month. And this book is due to come out in late October, and that is Free by Lea Ypi. And this is a fantastic book all about Albania and this young girl growing up in the sort of in the changing of governments and changing of politics in the country. And it's absolutely fascinating for me because it does a really clever thing of slowly bringing you on and kind of getting you into this rhythm of a young girl's thoughts in a very sort of innocent way. You know, lots is happening in the world, and we're meant to infer a lot of what's actually really going on. So she finds out that her family, for example, are Muslims, but that they can't celebrate anymore because sort of religious observance has been sort of outlawed and is very much viewed with scorn. And so she has this sort of strange thing of finding out she's a Muslim, not because they go to mosque or because of anything else, but finding out entirely because she's sort of basically saying to her parents, isn't religion weird? I can't believe, you know, I've heard in school that religious people are like this. And it's so interesting because we infer so much more from that. And I think the cleverness of this book is the fact that we see the crushing realities far more than she does, but also obviously she's writing this as an adult woman and is therefore purposely peppering these little bits in, knowing that's how she felt at the time and knowing that is not what was really going on. And it comes towards this crescendo at the end of the book that is just staggering. And I just read it sort of breathlessly, just really devouring it. It's gorgeous. I think it's just a really stunning book and really, really well worth your time. And the other book that's on that long list that I thought sounded particularly interesting as well is Cal Flyn's The Islands of Abandonment, which is also on the Wainwright shortlist. And this really looks at the idea of areas that have sort of once been sort of very much sort of shaped by humans that have been abandoned for whatever reason, and what that then looks like when nature sort of takes it back over. And so she does have the more obvious one of something like Chernobyl, but she does also then look at parts that you wouldn't expect, like Detroit in the US. And so it sounds fascinating, and I'm really, really keen to read this. And there are also tons of incredible books on that list that I've been meaning to check out for a while as well, like Empireland, which I just think sounds really, really interesting, kind of really detailing actually the kind of growth of empire, what that actually means, who was sort of affected by it and how, and what the kind of modern ramifications are of of empire, and how it hasn't really gone away as much as people think it has. You know, you don't just sort of, a country doesn't just become sort of liberated, and then everything's hunky-dory and the world is fine again. That's not quite how it works. And so I think this book sounds absolutely fascinating as well, and is one that I'm really, really keen to have a little look at. And next we come to two prizes that I have been really keeping an eye on, and I've been so tempted to go and read the shortlists of these every year. But I've kind of got a lot else going on with reading at the moment. As it is, my reading already feels like it's somewhat sort of scripted for for the next sort of few months of sort of like, no, Bob, you will sit down and you will read these books because you have to, because of the Polari Prize and the Wainwright Prize, and like obviously read all the book along list and all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to be careful with that so it doesn't completely dominate my life. But two other prizes that I'm super, super excited by, and I just think are really up my street. And I mean, this possibly also has to do with the fact that they are prizes that have championed books like Ducks Newburyport, which long-time subscribers may know I adore. And so the first of these is the James Tait Black Prize. And this book, this is a prize that is interesting as well because it's sort of done in quite a fascinating way. The sort of short list and sort of, well, the shorter list is created by University of Edinburgh students sort of whittling down books, and kind of ones are submitted, and it's kind of really interesting process. And it has just really celebrated books that are doing exciting experimental things with the novel form and are just done very, very well. And also, you can only win it once. So once you're, you know, if you're an author and one of your books wins it, you are never considered for the prize again. And actually, as a result, it means that you don't have these sort of big hitter authors in the shortlist every single year who might sort of win multiple times or might kind of take attention away from other books. Instead, you just get this really interesting set of books, and two books that have both been books that I was really keen on checking out this year, and I still very much plan on doing so. Is, I don't know how you pronounce actually, I will know soon because I'll listen to the audiobook, but Lote or Lote, and this sounds like a really fascinating book that really looks at sort of race and sexuality and queer identity, but also examines it through sort of various historical lenses and does some really exciting things. So that is a book that I'm really, really keen to check out, as I am for the non-fiction winner of that prize, which is, or the biography winner, sorry, I should say, which is Ghost in the Throat. And this is a book that I have been meaning to read for the longest time. At one point I had it on reserve at the library, it was my turn to read it, but I had so many other books that I needed to get in by a certain time, and just thought, this is not the moment. I don't want to rush this book. This sounds gorgeous, but it really looks at the lives of certain people, but sort of does it through also the life of language, in terms of Irish. And I just think it sounds absolutely stunning, and I'm really, really keen to read it as well. So that's one, the James Tait Black Prize, which I may in future years, maybe once I've sort of maybe done with some of the old Booker shortlists, I might start kind of going through that. But the other prize is one that I just find absolutely fascinating, and that's the Goldsmiths Prize. And this is a prize, again, that looks at really innovative writing, and particularly books that challenge the idea of what a novel is. And so this year has... it just, you know, the shortlist has been announced recently. The winner will be announced in November. But there are some books on here that I've been meaning to read for a very, very long time, such as Assembly by Natasha Brown, which there's been a lot of buzz around. And again, I'm sort of surprised it didn't make a book along list, but I think, you know, still is a book that I'm really excited to check out, particularly how it looks at how race and class and sort of discrimination around those are embedded into sort of various parts of the national picture in the UK. But you've also got a book that I spoke about a while ago, really, it feels like now, for a video on experimental fiction way back when. And this is this is a book called Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson. And I remember really enjoying this. I listened to the audio as well, which I thought was actually a really great experience for it. It's a book with this woman who's sort of dealing with the after effects of sexual violence and sexual assault. And she is sort of at work, she's going through her daily rhythms, but the whole book is told with these sort of overlapping, competing voices. So voices within her head, voices sort of external to her, kind of interrupting those thoughts. And the audiobook is a fantastic experience for that reason as well, because the voices layer and overlap in really beautiful, interesting ways. Yeah, I just think I thought this book was gorgeous, and the other four on that shortlist, which I'll quickly talk about, I think also just sound absolutely fascinating. So there's Claire-Louise Bennett's Checkout 19, and I've heard some really, really exciting things about this book. I've heard that it's really innovative and daring. The same for Keith Ridgway's A Shock. These are two books that I've been meaning to sort of check out and kind of put into a pile of like eventually we'll get to, but I think might bump up a little bit because of the Goldsmiths Prize. Another book that I thought, you know, a lot of people were talking about for the Booker long list, and it didn't quite make it. Leonie Ross's This One Sky Day, which I just think has this beautiful, sweeping, epic novel that apparently is just gorgeous in terms of its language. And one I hadn't heard of at all, actually, Isabel Wadner's Sterling Carat Gold, which I don't really know much about. I couldn't even find in any library in London from so the way London libraries work, they're all kind of interconnected and you can often borrow books between them. And it looked like none of London had a copy of it. So either it's not come out yet, or it just doesn't quite exist in libraries yet. But I will track down a copy and look at it, because this book also sounds really, really interesting, exploring some really quite fascinating ideas of sort of breaking down language and things like that. So very, very excited by all of this. Anyway, so as you can tell, there are millions of prizes, and there are tons I've not mentioned here as well. So like the Republic of Consciousness Prize, which again sort of deals with kind of quite experimental ideas and sort of books that really have imaginations of ideas and really kind of grappling with the idea of humanity. You've got the Jalak Prize, which focuses on writers of colour, and again is a prize that I've been really meaning to kind of give a bit more attention to and look at, because it consistently for the last sort of couple of years, I think it's only been going for a couple of years, has been kind of finding really exciting new voices and really championing them. So that's that. There's also the Stella Prize, I believe it's called, for Australian writers. There are so many incredible books and incredible prizes out there. And I think, you know, it's worth sort of saying, as much as, you know, obviously a book can still have a lot of value, even if it never makes a long list for any prize ever. But I think prizes are often quite nice ways of hearing about exciting new voices and exciting new books that you otherwise would absolutely never have heard of. You know, if you think again, like a book like Ducks Newburyport, which is near and dear to my heart, that's a book that actually, without a few kind of key prizes sort of really paying it some attention, I don't think would have had the same kind of sort of focus on it, really. And so that's really exciting to have a book like that really get championed. You know, it also gives a little boost to particularly new authors who might not necessarily, particularly in the last year and a half, might not necessarily have had the easiest time getting their book out there and into the hands of readers. And so I think this is all really, really exciting. There are a lot out there, so pace yourself. Maybe choose a few that you like, either kind of cherry pick books from some prizes or focus on a couple of prizes maybe to really dig into. This is more advice for me than as much advice for me as it is for I'm saying to you. But either way, you know, there are so many exciting books and exciting prizes out there, and I'd love to hear of a few more. So by all means, if you know of any other really great prizes or books that I should be paying attention to, feel free to pop those in the comments. And if you've been reading any of the prizes that I've been speaking about as well and have some thoughts, then please do also let me know. I've been Bob the Bookerer, rambling about book prizes. Again, like, this is so out of character. And I'll speak to you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.